Now the most common question which everybody has is to find, what is a data science interview format, how many rounds are there, what is the structure of interview, what are the expectations, what are the topics which we need to prepare, what would be the length of the interview, how many rounds are there in the data science interview. So the answer is, to be honest, there is no standard format, or there is no one common format across industry. Every company has their own way of evaluating the profile of the candidate. Some company can have like 2 rounds to 3 rounds to even like 7 to 8 rounds as well. One of the some of the examples which I can show is, let's say in this video, let's say first round could be with a hiring manager. That can span from 30 to 60 minutes. It can be a non-technical, it can be a technical, resume related, or a cultural fit question. Once you pass this round, then you can have like a 2 to 3 or 4 rounds with a panel of interviewers, and each round can be like 45 to 60 minutes. So some of the possible rounds could be like some of the technical rounds, some of the technical conceptual machine learning questions, or a data science related questions. The other could be like coding, live coding questions on either Python or SQL, or maybe both. The other round could be like more like a cultural or a behavior fit round, where they will ask you some of the non-technical questions. They want to see your behavior, your cultural thing, and so on. Other rounds could be like a case studies, like a design interview round, or maybe some scenario based round, or a product analytics round. And if you clear all those panel of rounds, then obviously they will offer you a job. That is a one format which you will see. The another variant of the data science interview could be, first you have again a call with a hiring manager. Then you can have a technical take home test as well. So for this take home test, you will get like probably 5 days, or maybe 7 days, or maybe 10 days, or 3 days. And some of the questions can be possible. Probably like one question could be like, you have to build a machine learning model. So they will give you a problem statement and a data set. You have to build a model, and based on that model there can be some follow-up questions. The other thing could be possible in the take home test would be like a SQL questions, or a Python questions, or some of the case studies questions where they want to see your thought process. So once you submit, and let's say you have cleared that take home test, then again you can have like a panel of interviews. This can be like 2 to 3 rounds, or it can be more, and similarly like it can be technical, coding, case studies, and so on. And once you clear this round, then obviously you will get a job offer. The another variant of data science interview could be like, your first round would be like a screening round, and that could be like from 45 to 60 minutes. And it would be a very structured round where, first 10-15 minutes they will check your Python skill. Another 15-20 minutes they might check your SQL skill, a live hands-on SQL skill or a Python. For 5-10 minutes they might ask you some of the statistical or a machine learning questions. And then probably in the last 10 or 15 minutes they might ask you some of the case study related questions, where they will give you some kind of a case scenario, and they wanted to see your thought process on that. So once you clear the screening round, which can be like around 1 hour, then they will call you, which they technically called as a final round. Although it's a final round, but you can have like 4 to 6 rounds, and each can be like 45 to 60 minutes each. One of the round could be like a technical or a statistical concepts, or a probability or hypothesis questions. Other round could be like a coding, live hands-on coding on Python or SQL. One round could be more like, your recent project related questions, and it can be little technical as well, because they wanted to understand why you use some of these technologies, what was the thought process, and so on. Then cultural round, behavior round, and so on. And then once you clear all those panel interviews, then obviously they will give you an offer. The another variant could be like, first you have a take home test, and then you will have a panel of interviews, 2 to 3 rounds or 4 rounds, and then finally you have a interview with a hiring manager or a director or a HR for 30 to 60 minutes. And once you clear all these rounds, then they will give you a job offer. So as you can see that there is no standard format to the interview. Every company has a own way of evaluating. So the most easy way to understand what would be the interview format. It's check with a recruiter or a hiring manager that how many rounds are there, what would be those rounds, what would be the expectations. So that would be the best way to find out how many rounds are there and what and how to prepare for those rounds. Now the good thing is that although the format looks very different from one company to another company, but some of the rounds are very common across every company. So as I mentioned, that one of the round could be like a live SQL questions, or maybe they will give you some kind of a take home test where you need to write down the SQL where you get enough amount of time, or a Python live hands on, or maybe take home, building a machine learning model in the take home test, or maybe in the live as well. Then product metrics round where they will give you some kind of a case study and you have to write down the approach, what are the metrics you will planning to use and how would you evaluate. Then the machine learning interview questions would be on questions on some of the questions on machine learning concepts, statistics, hypothesis, and so on. And similarly, statistical question, A/B testing, and then resume related questions. So in this round, they might ask you some of your recent projects, how did you implement those rounds, and so on. Then another machine learning system design. So you have to explain, they will give you some kind of a problem statement and you have to build a solution from end to end, from requirements and goal to machine learning model, then evaluation and the challenges and so on. And then the next round could be cultural fit or a behavior round questions where they will ask you some of the non-technical questions like explain your recent project, what are your weakness and strength, what is your most innovative project which you are proud of that, or how do you resolve conflicts when you have with your cross functional team, or has it happened in the past when you have missed the timelines or deadlines. So these are some of the very common rounds which you see across every company. It's just every company has a different way of taking the test or taking the interviews or evaluating the profile, but the rounds would look like very similar to it. Some company would have take like 3 rounds out of this 9, some will take 4 out of this, 5 out of this. So the good thing is that at least you know what to prepare, and whichever company you get the interview call, you will be more or less prepare for it. It's just their interview rounds would be little different from one another. So the next question is, we have given two tables. The table on the left, which has the revenue level transaction at each customer. So we have 5 columns: customer ID, order date, revenue, and the product ID. So this left table which basically will tell you that this customer ID one, when they made order. So this guy has made the order on 1st of January. What was the sale on that? Let's say it's $100. And what was the product he or she bought? So it's PA. Now we have another table on the right, which is like a reference table for product. So we can see for each product ID, it has given on the right what are the category it belongs. So basically you can join these two tables based on the product ID. So on the right table, it's a reference table for product. So in order to find in which category this product fall into it, you can see on the right table. Now the question is asking that you need to find the top 2 or top 3 products for each category by revenue. So for example, for CA category, we need to find out which are my top 3 products in terms of revenue. And similarly for CB category, I need to print out which are my top 2 or 3 products based on the revenue. So my thought process would be, first of all, to join both the tables based on the product ID. Then I will create like a Windows function, and then partition at category, and then order by sum of revenue in the descending order. I'm doing this sum of revenue because one product can have multiple transactions as well. So I just want to sum up all those transactions. And then finally, I will filter out the records where my row number is less than equal to 3. In that way, I will get the top 3 products for each category. So let's see how can we do the SQL on the editor. So let's see what are the content what we have in both the tables. So let's start with the product risk table. And when I run it, I can see that the columns with customer ID, order date, revenue, and the product ID. And let's confirm on the second table as well, which is the product reference table. And we can see that in the second table, we have a list of product ID along with their category ID. So basically what the first thing we can do is to join both the tables using, let's say, left outer join. And at the same time, we will also write the Windows function to get the rank as well for each of the product. So let's start with it. Let me run the first table to get the name of the columns. So what I'm doing is that let me fetch first the let's say category ID, which will be present in the second table. So I know the name of the column, which is category ID, and then a dot product ID, and then I will do the sum of revenue, because as we know that each product can have multiple transactions, so I want to do the aggregation for that. So I can write the name as, let's say, total sales, and then I will create a dense rank function to get the rank of each of the products. So dense rank over partition by. So here I am doing the partition. Here I am doing the partition by category ID, which will be b dot category ID, and then order by sum of revenue, and I will put it in the descending order, and let's say I'm giving this as rank. So the name of this table is product revenue, and let's say it's A, and then I'm doing the left outer join with a second table, which is product category, and giving the name as B, and on A dot product ID and B dot product ID. And since we have done the aggregation, so let's do the group by. And this we will do. So let's see what is the output we are getting from this table. And we can see that for each of the product, I am getting some kind of a rank. So for, let's say, for category A, I can see which are my top products. They are arranged in the descending order of total sales, and the rank has been given. What I will do, I will give it the name as, let's say, C. And then finally, I will fetch all the records of the C dot table. And I'm also putting a condition where, because we need, let's say, display the top 3 products of each category. So we can give the name as C dot rank less than equal to 3. And now we can see that for each of the category A, which are my top 3 products based on the total sales. So next question is, we need to write a program which can tell us whether a given input is palindrome or not. So for example, the kayak is palindrome because whether you see from beginning to end or end to beginning, it looks same. At the same time, you have to make sure that your punctuations or lowercase, uppercase should not influence your palindrome. So let's see how can we create this program in a Python notebook. So the first thing what I am doing is to import the package string, and second thing, next thing what I am doing is to let's say the input is kayak, and we can see that we have some punctuation as well, and this punctuation should not influence the palindrome. What does it mean is that when you see from beginning to end or last to end, they look different because of the punctuation. But if you remove the punctuation, the string will look exactly a palindrome. So we want to remove this punctuation as well from this input string. And secondly, we want to standardize, because there could be an input where we have a mix of uppercase and the lowercase. So we have to standardize first of all to lowercase, and then we will remove the punctuation, and then we will compare whether a string is palindrome or not. So let's start. First, I'm converting into a lowercase. The next thing what I'm doing is to check whether any alphabet is punctuation or not. The moment I find any punctuation, I will replace with something blank. So let's say I'm using for loop to iterate each character of the string. So let's say if I in string dot punctuation, then str equal to str dot replace I with a blank, and then I will check after making it standardized to lower, removing all the punctuation. Then I will check the condition if str equal to whether the string is equal to when we are reversing. So if this condition gets true, which means that whether you see a string from beginning to end or end to beginning, they look exactly same, then I'm printing as palindrome. Else I'm printing as not palindrome. And we can see that we are getting the right output, because kayak is a palindrome whether you see from beginning to end or other way around, and this punctuation is not influencing our, because we have removed the punctuation in this step itself. Let's try out another thing, maybe make it like a lowercase, and still it's giving a palindrome. And now let's remove this. Now this string is not a palindrome, so we expect the output to be not palindrome, and we are getting the right output. So the second design problem statement is, how would you design a fraud identifying system for a company? So as you can see that, this statement doesn't have again much details. It's just like a one-line problem statement. It's saying that you need to create a design which can identify whether a given transaction is a fraud or not. So as we learned in our previous design thing, is that before we start solving this problem, it's important to ask some of the clarifying questions with the interviewer. So some of the clarifying questions could be like, what kind of a frauds are we getting? Is it happening in one product like online account, or some kind of a bots account are problems, or maybe frauds are happening in the credit card transactions? Is it happening in some specific region which is giving a lot of headaches to the company? Or what is the current benchmark numbers for fraud detection? So for example, if you have already created some process, some model, or some kind of a system, what is the accuracy rate on that system? And at the same time, we can also check with the interviewer, is there any kind of a business expectation or business metrics with them? So do ask and check the clarifying question, because that will help you in getting more details from the problem statement, and at the same time you will get very engaged with the interviewer as well. Now once you get all the clarifying questions, details and the answers, the next step is to, now we can define the goal of our design system. So I can say that, hey, the design, the goal of this design problem is that I want to design an automation fraud system which can catch the fraudulent activity in a timely manner, so that it can provide excellent service to customers that bring peace, secure, reliability in customers' mind. At the same time, there should be minimal impact to our business operations or the reputations or the brand value. And this automated system should exceed the business expectations or the current benchmark numbers. So once we have defined the goal and the objective with your interviewer, now the next step, as we discuss in the problem design system as well, hypothesis. Hypothesis is very important. Maybe it's not important from the point of interviewer, but for your own sake it's very important, because you want to understand why the frauds are happening in the system. Some of the questions will come in your mind, which are the most frequent frauds are happening in the system. Are these frauds are happening in some kind of operating system like Android, or is it happening like in some device like mobile or a web browsing and so on? Which locations or regions are most prone to frauds or suspicious IP address? Are these frauds are happening like during the bank account details, and how are we validating those bank details? And as we want to understand what is the fraud accuracy rate at this moment, and how many times we have missed the fraud. So some of the hypotheses you must write down on the paper, and because this will help you giving direction to your to your approach, as well as what are the different data sources we need to pick. So once you write down all the hypotheses, the next step you need to provide is the data sources. What are the data sets you are planning to take for this design? And it's very important to communicate to the interviewer what is your thought process, what are the data sources you're planning to take. I can say that for this design problem, I'm planning to take fraud data set, which should have some kind of a columns like timestamp, user details, like regions, operating system, devices, fraud target label, or what kind of a frauds we have seen. Some kind of a customer data, like who are those customers who got impacted due to fraud, what were their email IDs, what was the age of the email IDs, and so on. Bank details, like customer bank details, their validation details. We can also use some external data as well, like age of email ID, current bank status details. But you need to tell them what is the data set you're planning to take. So you need to tell, I can say that instead of taking all the 4 data sets, for me probably I can say I just want to take a fraud data set. That is good enough to solve the problem. So the point here is that you should communicate clearly to the interviewer what is the data source and what is your thought process on that. Then the next step, which is again very critical and very important, is to define your features here. What should be your independent features and what should be your dependent features? I can say, for an example, my independent features would be, let's say, fraud name or a fraud ID, timestamp, geography, fraud label, website, or is a mobile, IP address, and so on. And at the same time, you need to tell, in the training data, what each row uniquely identified. Is it like each row is telling about fraud ID details, or is it aggregated as a customer level, or some like a daily level, hourly level, monthly level? You need to tell what exactly each row means here. Then the second is very important to tell dependent variable, because your dependent variable will tell us whether you're considering this problem as a classification, regression, clustering, or what kind of a problem you're thinking. So I can say for this problem, my dependent variables are classification, like fraud and normal. There will be 2 classes, fraud and normal, and my output will also tell us like probability of failure or a probability of fraud, I can say. So I can say, hey, with this transaction there is a 90% chance this transaction is a fraud, or a 95% chance is a fraud. So once you have defined your independent features, dependent features, and target label, the next step you need to select how long you need your training data, whether you need like last 6 months of historical data, 12 months, 18 months, and how would you want to split your training data? Like, do you want 70% training data and 30% validation data, or 80-20? You need to mention this point here as well. Then the next step is model building. What is the model you're planning to take? As we discussed in the previous design problem, it's very important whichever model you select, whether it's XGBoost, logistic, Naive, decision tree, you need to provide a solid reasoning behind it. What is your intuition, selecting that particular model. And then you can say that the advantage of this model is that I will get some kind of a probability scores, or some kind of a scores, or a calibrated probability scores, and based on those scores I can create different tiers level. Like if the score is coming between 0.9 to 1, then I will say that, hey, this belongs to tier A, and this short this is a fraud thing. If it falls into tier B, 0.75 to 0.9, then there is a chance this transaction is like a fraud, which we can take the input from the user in the real time, sending a text message or a call to get their input. And if the score is falling into tier C, which is let's say less than 0.5, then it's a normal transaction. We will pass it this transaction. So once we have defined our model, which model are we planning to take, then it comes to the how would you going to evaluate your model. So for example, I can say that I will going to validate my model based on following metrics such as precision, F measure, recall, key statistics. I will also use cross validation to make sure that there should not be overfitting. So you need to provide your rationale behind what are the metrics you are planning to take to evaluate the performance of the model. Now let's say your model has done a great job on the validation data, and let's say on some of the out of sample data, and your business partners are very confident, your senior leadership has given you green signal to migrate into production. So when you decided to move it into the production, what would be your implementation strategy would be? So you can say that, hey, my implementation strategy on the production would be through A/B testing. So 80% of the population, I will split between 80% and 20%. 80% of the population will be evaluate continuously with the old model, but this 20% of the population will be evaluate through a new model what we have built. And this 20% population selection should be very random. When I say very random, means that it should be include like new customer, old customer, sensitive regions, timestamps, different hours of the day, because you don't want to fall into a selection bias. You don't want to select a population which get biased to a certain thing, and suddenly your models are not statistically making any sense. So once you have defined the A/B testing strategy, then the next question will come up: how will you evaluate the results of the A/B testing? So there you can explain that what are the metrics I'm planning to take. You can say that I can still evaluate the performance about the accuracy rate, and then compare that accuracy rate with my existing model. There is a lift in the performance of the new model? Are we seeing that this model is catching up frauds much better as compared to the previous model? So you need to define, or you need to explain to the interviewer what are the metrics here at this time you will take to evaluate the performance of the new model in the production environment. Remember, this is a production environment. So in the production environment, in A/B testing, your metrics might be little different as compared to when you're evaluating the model on the validation data. So make sure that you have a good 2-3 metrics written down which you can mention for your A/B testing. So I can say that one of the acceptance criteria could be from the business point, not from the technical, from the business point, would be ease of implementation. How fast it's responding to fraud. What is the estimation cost? What is the estimation cost? Is this new model is beating the old model results or not? So some of the metrics or some of the acceptance criteria you can tell. And what would be your business strategy, like how the admin team or a production team or a business team will see the output. So you can say that this model will show the probability of frauds, like it will say that what is the score for each transaction. Higher the score, higher the chances of a fraud, and it will tell in advance, like in the real time, so that timely actions can be taken, and eventually it can stop the fraud being happening. Then the next part is again very important. You need to explain what are the challenges are there in this whole approach. You can say that sampling is very important for A/B testing, because you don't want to fall into a selection bias in the A/B testing. You should not fall into a bias criteria that and you don't want you want that 20% population to be very diverse, very random, so that it can be a representative of most of the segments of your population. Another challenge would be, since it's a fraud data set, so training data set will going to be unbalanced, because obviously you expect that in your training data 99% or 95% of the data points will be normal, and remaining 3% to 5% will be a fraudulent. So your data set will going to be very unbalanced. So that could be a challenge when you're building your model. Another challenge, you can say that, hey, since this is a fraud model, and every day, every week, every month, or in fact every hour, new frauds are been creating. So it's very important for our model to be retrained frequently, maybe once in a quarter, with a new refreshed data set, so that our model should be up to date with the new fraudulent things. Then obviously, how would you communicate this whole approach to tech users and the business users? So you can say that, hey, for tech users, I will explain the whole approach in a more mathematical approach, more data science concepts, statistical results. Whereas when I'm going to explain this whole end-to-end approach to business users, I will typically use more like timelines, cost involved, ease of convenience, share the output and results through Power BI or Tableau. And finally, my implementation strategy would be like, I will use some kind of agile process. I will create like a diverse team of people where I should have like some data engineers, SME, fraud SME, data science modelers, scrum masters, team leaders, and so on. So this is how we can build like an end-to-end design problem where we are covering each and important point of it. As I mentioned before as well, there is no right or wrong answer, and this approach is not like the best approach, but definitely it will help you in creating a structure and organization to your answer, to your approach, and make sure that you are explaining end to end. As I explained before as well, if you get an opportunity like a whiteboard or a drawing board or some kind of a notepad, do use that one to write down your points or maybe create a flowchart, because that is easy to explain to interviewer through diagrams or flowchart or some write-up as compared to explaining the whole approach through verbally. So do take advantage of if you get whiteboard, drawing board or a text pad. Thank you. So let's start with the next one. It's saying that team would like to change the user interface of their web page, and they want to change the composer. The composer is the one where users write a post. So they want to change and replace with a like an Instagram feature where instead of box they will like to add a plus button at the bottom of the page. So instead of having a composer, they want to replace with a plus button so that user can use to write a post. So the question is, how would you test if this is a good idea or not? So again, reiterate the question. The company or a team wants to change the user interface of the composer where typically user write a post to a plus button at the bottom of the page. So if a user click on this plus button, they can write the post. So the question is, we wanted to check whether this is a good idea or not to introduce a plus button instead of a composer. How would you check? So again, make sure that if ask any of the clarifying questions with the interviewer so that you are clear with the problem statement, and if you want to use any kind of assumptions before defining the goal or hypothesis. So let's assume that you have asked all the clarifying questions. So let's define the goal or the objective of this case study. So I can say that the goal of this project is to change the web interface or the user interface of composing post. The task is to replace the box with a plus button icon at the bottom of the page, and the business value is that this will increase the user look and feel, and it should be easy and faster to create the post. So the objective is to evaluate whether this is a good idea or not. So once you have defined the goal, the next step is to provide or write the hypothesis. Now hypothesis is very important because that will help in understanding whether how to evaluate this new feature. So we can mention some of the hypotheses would be that is this number of posts. So let's say after introducing this plus button, is the number of posts are increasing or not from each type of user, whether it's an active user or a passive user. So one could be this one, whether this new feature is leading to increasing the engagement of the users or not. Another could be how easy to search the plus button for the users, especially the new users on the web page. Another important thing is how fast this plus button is responding to create the post. Another important thing is how elegant it looks, and it should not affect the overall look of the page. Then obviously, what are the qualitative feedback we are getting from the user in terms of rating, star rating or comment. And another thing is, what is the color of the plus button? Is it easy to find the button or not on the web page? And what should be a good color or an elegant color to have on the web page. So these are some of the hypothesis questions we can provide and explain to the interviewer. So once you have defined the hypothesis, the next thing is to define what are the metrics we will use to evaluate this hypothesis. So I can say that how many total number of posts or engagements are happening before and after the introduction of a plus button, and we can use some kind of a trends on the line chart to see if there is an increase in the number of posts or decrease in the number of posts after introduction of the plus button. The next metric we can use how much time or an average it executes or respond to create a post. So for example, when somebody click a plus button, how many milliseconds or seconds is taking to create a post, and find the average time it responds at different time periods in a day. So for example, we can select like from 0 to 8, from let's say 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. how many milliseconds or seconds it's taking on an average. Similarly, we can create another bucket of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. then 4 p.m. to 12 p.m. how well it's responding. Then how much time on average for new users to find the button and create the post. It's very important. Maybe for old users it can be easy to find that button, but maybe for new users, how much time on an average it's taking them to find the button and create the post. The qualitative analysis like total number of positive or negative comments, similarly number of star rating related to the placement of buttons, its colors and look and feel, and how much time and on an average it takes for existing user to create the post. This is also interesting because if existing users are not liking the new change, then it's again also a problem with our loyalty customers. Once you have defined the metric, the next part is how will you going to implement this new feature. So I can say that, hey, for that I will use A/B testing. So A/B testing we can evaluate the performance of this plus button or a new feature through A/B testing. This can be done by selecting 10% of the test users. So this test users should be diverse and should be range from different age groups, geography, new users, active users, old users. This 10% should be as diverse as possible, as random as possible, and they should not fall into any kind of a selection bias. Now this new button will only be shown to those users which are the part of this 10%, and we can monitor and track the performance through some top priority metrics, such as how much on an average it takes for any user to create the post, how fast this plus button responds, and some of the feedback through comments and the star rating, some like qualitative. And we can experiment this A/B testing for let's say for 3 to 6 weeks, and we can see that whether those metrics exceeded the benchmark or not. If they have exceeded the benchmark and meet the business requirement, business expectation, then we can go ahead and replace the text box with the plus button for all the set of users. The next part of this case study would be this plus button. This is the challenges we can face in this whole approach. So this plus button should be placed on a page in such a way that it should be visible. It should be clearly visible and should be easy to access, else it can give a bad user experience and might cannibalize the user base and might move to competitors, because it might happen that users say that, hey, this new feature is very boring, not very user friendly, and it might happen that this itself start reducing the user engagement of the users, and they might feel that it's better to move to a different competitors because their web page or their features are much more user friendly as compared to what they're seeing with the introduction of a new feature. So finally, the conclusion, what you are concluding with the whole your case study. So the conclusion would be the goal is to replace the text button so that it's easy for user. It should be user friendly and should give a good user experience. This new feature should be evaluated through A/B testing and measured through some top priority metrics. And once this metric has exceeded the expectation, then only it should be executed for all the 100% of the users in the production environment. And at last, we should be very careful about the drawbacks and the challenges, because if not implemented properly, then it might result in in cannibalizing some of the user base for us. So as you can see, the end-to-end analysis of the case study. So the important thing is that because there is no right or wrong answers to any of the case study, but make sure that you should create a structure or a organization for your solution the way I have created in the case study, where I have created all the sections and presenting my thought process and the details. Similarly, when you get questions like that, make sure that you're properly creating a template and the structure to your solution, so that it's easy to communicate, is easy to understand, and is easy to create an engagement between you and the interviewer, so that interviewer should be very completely convinced with your solution. So let's start with the hypothesis testing questions. And first question is, let's say there is a company called ABC, which is a manufacturing company or making products, and they basically manufacture chocolate packets. So every day they manufacture like thousands of chocolate packets, and they believe and claim that weight of each chocolate packet is 300 grams. So the question is, how to check or test or validate whether their belief and claim is correct or not, whether they are really making or manufacturing a packet which has a weight of 300 grams. Now let's assume the scenario, if ABC is manufacturing only, let's say 1000 packets or 500 packets or 1000 packets, then we can check it manually each packet and see whether the weight of each packet is 300 grams or not. But think in that way, that if a company is manufacturing like hundreds and thousands of packets every day or every month, then it's not very easy to check each and every packet. So what we will do in that case is to use a concept of central limit theorem and inference statistics. So for this, we will going to use a hypothesis testing to see whether ABC claim is correct or not. So what we are doing here is that instead of checking each and every hundreds and thousands of packets, what we will do, we will pick randomly 50 packets from the population, or a sample of 50 packets. And those random selected 50 packets, let's say each have certain weight, like let's say first weight is 270.5, second has 282.32, third has 308, 299, 302, 291, 286, and so on. So let's say these are the weights of selected 50 packets. And we found that the mean weight is 294.6 grams. Now through hypothesis testing, we want to understand whether the selected sample are statistically significant or not. So there are a lot of information on this slide, so let's go one by one. So let's assume that we have selected 50 packets, and these are their selected weights, 278, 282, 308, and so on. So what we are doing is that X bar is equal to 294.6. So the mean of the selected 50 packets are 294.6. And the hypothesis mean, which we believe and claim, it's equal to 300 grams. So that is 300. And the standard deviation of those selected 50 packets, these are the selected 50 packets, their standard deviation is coming to be 10.98. And number of packets what we have randomly selected, n equal to 50. So the steps which we are planning to take to check the statistical significant or not, these are the 4 steps we will take. First, we will define and state what is our null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. Then we will specify what would be the significance level. The third, we will calculate the p-value from t-value for the sample data. And then finally, based on the p-value, we will compare with the significant level whether to reject or not reject our null hypothesis. Now, since the claim of the company is that each packet they believe equal to 300 grams, so since there is a sign of equal to, that equal to I am putting in the null hypothesis. So mu is equal to 300. So that would be our null hypothesis, mu equal to 300, because we believe that the weight of each packet is 300 grams. And obviously the alternate hypothesis will be mu not equal to 300, not equal to 300. So now we have defined our alternate and the null hypothesis. So the next step is we will define the significant level. So the significant level we are taking is equal to 0.05. So 0.05. Now the next step is we will calculate the t-value. So the formula for t-value is x bar minus hypothesis mean divided by standard deviation and under root of n. So after putting the values 294.6 minus 300, we are getting the t-value which is minus 3.47. So on the right side of the graph, if you see, I have plotted this this distribution, and 300 is our claimed hypothesis mean, and we can see that on the graph minus 3.47 is going towards the tail end of this graph, which looks like that when we calculate its p-value. So this p-value I have calculated in the Excel sheet. So there is a formula like t dot dist. If you put the t-value which is minus 3.47, then comma, then number of samples minus 1. So we have selected 50 samples, so 50 minus 1, 49, and then degree of freedom equal, I'm taking as 1, so comma 1. So the p-value I'm getting 0.004. Since this is a two-tail test, so I'm multiplying by 2 and I'm getting the value equal to 0.01. Now we have calculated the p-value for this test, which is coming to be 0.01. Now we will compare with the significant level. As we defined our significant level equal to 0.05, so we can see that p-value is less than significant level, which is 0.0.1. So it means we will reject the null hypothesis. So since we are rejecting the null hypothesis, so it means that alternate hypothesis is correct. So we can conclude that let's assume there could be a multiple scenarios. The conclusion would be, if we feel that if H0 or our null hypothesis is true, if we feel that is true, and then for some reason we find a wrong 50 samples, then what we can do is to try this complete test again with a different 50 samples and see maybe in those 50 samples our null hypothesis will be, we will accept the null hypothesis. Otherwise, if this test is absolutely correct, it means that ABC manufacturing company has to stop their manufacturing and correct the weight of the packets, because it means that whatever they believe and claim, that is not correct. The weight of the packet is not 300 grams. They have to stop the manufacturing and correct the weight of the packets, because our p-value is less than the significant level. So we are rejecting the null hypothesis. It means our mean is not equal to 300. It means it will be alternate hypothesis. And the other scenario, as we discussed, that if a company feel that, hey, the samples what you have taken, that 50 samples, is not a correct representation, then we can try to test with another or 50 samples and see if we can get some different results on that. Now these are the hypothesis testing. The another thing what we can do is to find the confidence interval. So we can take like a 95% confidence interval, and when we put the values in this formula, x mean, x of bar plus minus t into s divided by under root of n, we are getting 291.49 to 297.7. So it means that this saying is that there is a good chance that the population the population what we have for the packets, their weights are somewhere in between 291.49 to 297.7, which is clearly less than their claim of 300 grams. So it means that ABC is not doing correct when they are labeling their weights. So they have to stop the manufacturing and correct the weight of the packets. So the next question is, you have given a dice, and you need to tell how many on an average, or what would be the expected number of dice rolls are required to get 2 consecutive 6. So let's say the expected number of dice rolls are required is x, and let's break down this problem into multiple scenarios. Let's check the first scenario. So let's assume that in your first roll you have not got a 6. You have got some different number, maybe between 1 to 5. Then we have wasted that particular roll. Now the probability of this event to be happened is 5 by 6, because there are 6 possible outcomes, and if 6 is not coming, then the probability would be 5 out of 6. Now the total number of rolls required is x plus 1. Now the next scenario could be that let's say you're lucky and in the first roll you got a 6, and let's say in the second roll you didn't get a 6, you got some different number, then I can say that you have wasted 2 rolls, because we wanted to have a 2 consecutive 6. Now this particular turns are gone. Now the probability of this event to happen is, for the first roll to get a 6 would be 1 out of 6, 1 by 6, and for the second roll to not get a 6 would be 5 by 6. So when we multiply 1 by 6 into 5 by 6, that will come out to be 5 divided by 36. So 5 divided by 36 means that in your first turn or in your first roll you will get a 6, but in your second roll you will not get a 6. So it means you have wasted 2 rolls, and that probability of this event would be 5 divided by 36. So it means now the total number of rolls required would be x plus 2. X plus 2. Now let's say the third scenario, and let's say you are very lucky and fortunate, because in your first roll you got a 6, and even in your second flip or a second roll you also got a 6. Then we are done. So the probability of this event would be 1 by 6 into 1 by 6, because in your first roll you are getting a 6, that probability would be 1 divided by 6, and similarly to get a 6 in your second flip as well, that probability would be also 1 by 6. So that will become 1 divided by 36, and the total number of rolls required are 2. So these would be some of the scenarios could be possible. Now let's see how can we combine all the 3 scenarios into one, and then see what would be the value of that x. Now let's add all the 3 scenarios into this equation. So total number of expected dice would be x. So we are putting here x equal to, now we are combining all the 3 scenarios into one. So the first scenario was 5 by 6, that is the probability, into x plus 1. That's what we are doing, 5 by 6 into x plus 1. Now in the second scenario, the probability of that scenario to happen is 5 by 36 into x plus 2. So that's what we have done, plus 5 by 36 into x plus 2. And then similarly, the probability of a third event to happen is 1 by 36, and the total rolls required is 2. So it becomes plus 1 by 36 into 2. So if you solve this equation, you will get the value of x equal to 2. So it means the expected number of dice rolls required to get 2 consecutive 6 is 42. So the first question is, which is a very common question in the interview, is explain what is the business impact of your project, or how would you evaluate the success of the project, or some of the KPIs to measure it. No matter what kind of a state of the art technology you have used, how would you evaluate the success based on the business value? That is very important to understand or explain, how your project has helped in terms of business. So there are various ways you can mention to measure the success of your project. One could be whether your project was able to reduce the expenses or a cost cutting, or maybe it helped in some kind of a getting new customer or a customer acquisition, or maybe reducing the attrition. The other way we can measure the success through a profit or a revenue is generating, or maybe optimizing some of the internal processes of the company, maybe reducing the time frame in generating some output. Now some of the examples would be, for example, let's say cost cutting or reducing the expenses. You can mention that we have updated a new technology. So you can mention that new technology, what you have done. And you can say that, the business value is that our earlier or old project or old technology was costing like $1 million every year to maintain it, which was like a bottleneck. So now after updating with a new technology or a new state of the art technology, or maybe let's say you have implemented some of the artificial intelligence or machine learning or some kind of a new architecture solutions, now you need only $560,000 to maintain it, and every year company is saving around $500,000. So in that way you can explain how your project was brought the business value for your team, for your organization. The other way you can mention customer acquisition. You can say that through my project, through some of the various state of the art technologies we have used, like some analytics or machine learning or new architect solution or new databases, we have acquired 50,000 customers in the last 2 months, and this number is growing, whereas we were able to retain or reduce attrition by 2%. So this is another business value you can mention for your project. The other thing you can mention that, if your project has, generating some profit or a revenue. So I can say that, in this with this project, our company is able to generate like, $300,000 revenue in the last 6 months, and it's growing at 135%. And our finance analyst team is expecting to break even in the next 10 months. So this is some of the other way you can, quantifying the success of your project. The fourth one could be, you have optimized some of the internal process. So you can say that, earlier technology or earlier report used to take like 8 hours to generate the business report because of the huge volume of data, complex calculation, and a bunch of different operations. Now with this project, we were able to generate the report now in 2 hours. So we have reduced the time frame from 8 hours to 2 hours, and this enabling the business partner to get the reports quicker and help them to make the critical decisions faster. So these are some of the business value you can explain, and it's very important, whenever you explain your projects, it's utter important to include the business value of your project as well. I understand that technology is also very important. What is the technology you have used, but you have to mention the business value as well. What is the business value of your project, how it helps a company in getting some of the businesses. The another very common question in the interview is to define what is bias and what is variance, and also explain the concept of bias variance trade-off. So you can explain that bias is a situation when your both your training accuracy and validation accuracy is very low, and this is a sign of like a underfitting, and this can be reduced by increasing the more features in your data set, or maybe adding more training data points in your data set. And similarly, the variance happens when your training error and validation error has a very huge difference between the two, and this is a good sign that your model is facing a overfitting. And in that scenario, the approach would be to reduce your feature space through regularization or some other feature important step. Now as we can see in the graph, we can see that when your training score and validation score are very high and both are trying to overlap, then this is a good sign that that model is a good fit. But if your training score is very high but your validation score is very low, and there is a big difference between both the scores, then there is a good chance that there is a high variance in the model. And similarly, in other way around, if you see on the right graph, your training score and validation score are both trying to overlap, but the problem is that both are very low. So this is a sign of a high bias. Similarly, we can see that if the training score and validation score has a very big difference between the two, then there is a good chance it's suffering from a high variance. So that's what the trade-off is, that we want to build a certain model which can have a trade-off of bias and variance somewhere in between here, which typically called as a best model, because in reality it's very difficult to remove the bias or variance completely. So what we can do is to find a bias variance trade-off which can be in between this graph, which can be called as a optimal model or a best model. The another way we can see how high bias or underfit looks, we can see that there is a big difference between all the data points. This blue line is your predicted curve and your x are the actual, and all have a very high error rate in all the points. Whereas if you see this middle graph, which looks very optimal, this particular model looks much more generalized as compared to this graph on the right, which is like a high variance or overfit. If you see its training error, it would be like 0%. If you see the training error on this graph, would be maybe like 80%. Whereas if you see this particular graph, you would see that training error and validation error are low and both are very close to each other. The another way we can see this underfitting and just right and overfitting, you can see with underfitting there is so much of residual or error between actual values and the predicted values. This is still much better, and if you see, this looks like a good model, but the problem is it's overfitted. You will see that training error might be like 0% or 1%, but it's not a very good model. So we don't want this kind of a model or this kind of a model. We want something this one which is looks like a bias variance trade-off. So in this graph we can see we want a model to be somewhere here which might have few degree of bias as well as variance, but still it's much better than as compared to high bias or a high variance.